Good evening, and thank you for joining me in this webinar and training. My name is Melissa Stoker, and I'm one of the admissions counselors at a public mid-sized university with all the benefits and challenges of a public organization. I appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedules to learn more about the trends, challenges, and strategies for success that I've discovered and in some cases experienced within volunteer management in the public sector. Whether you are learning more about how to manage volunteers you already work with, or you're simply interested in learning for a future initiative you'd like to start or a position you'd like to fill, I hope you find this training helpful and interesting. Let's say your manager assigned you to attend this webinar and you're thinking to yourself, why does this even matter? Well, first of all, we all recognize that human capital is one of the strongest assets in our organizations. By the way, that human capital is you and me, the public managers working to further missions of our prospective agencies. While human capital is responsible for about 80% of an organization's budget, the human capital are also the ones who give an organization its competitive edge, the ones who truly move the organization forward in reaching its goals. So what does that tell us about volunteers? I think it's safe to say they can be an extremely powerful way to make your organization even better. While having more volunteers certainly does increase administrative responsibilities and therefore could increase human capital costs, there is still significant work that is completed without having to shell out a salary or a wage. Did you know that the estimated value of a volunteer time in 2011 was right around $21.79 per hour? That's a salary of just about $45,000 per year if the volunteer worked full-time. So that's the monetary value of designing strong volunteer management structures. Beyond that, volunteering programs can also help your organization reach many more members of the community than your organization could achieve alone. For example, in the Towson University Admissions Office, we reach out to alumni from our alumni volunteer database, personal circles, and other networks who help us by writing postcards to admitted students coming from out of state, such as states like New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia. The postcard's a simple couple sentences congratulating the student on their acceptance and mentioning one or two things the alum loved about the university. Then the alum sends the postcard with the prepaid postage the university provided. By collaborating with these alumni, last year we sent out just over 1,000 admitted out-of-state students handwritten cards with only 112 alumni volunteers. Sure, the admissions office could have sent an email to all the students who applied, just about 13,000 last year, but the volunteers allowed us to send personalized notes that offer a warm and friendly congratulations to the admitted students. This is something our office simply could not have done alone. That's the power of volunteer management. I would never claim our system was perfect, but I hope some of the lessons I've learned can help you too. Before we dive into the challenges and trends of volunteer recruitment and management and things like that, I want to first make sure we're all on the same page and we understand the scope of what a volunteer can be. There are several key concepts to consider when building a volunteer management structure. First, we need to recognize that there are different types of time commitments. We need to recognize the timing for our targeted group of volunteers. For example, did you know that the U.S. ranks among the highest on a global scale in percentage of employees working 50 hours per week or more? If I was in the room with you, I would ask you to raise your hand if you worked more than 40 hours last week, and I would expect the majority of you to raise your hands, me included. So this means we need to analyze the work we need completed and consider which populations of people who actually have time for your project and what kind of time commitments you need. There are two basic time frames for commitment: long-term commitment and episodic commitments. Long-term commitments typically involve the same volunteer returning on a regular basis. Maybe you need a volunteer to write blog articles or social media posts for your organization. In this case, you probably want some consistency in your content, so using the same volunteer or a small group of volunteers could be the best option. Episodic volunteers, on the other hand, are characterized by at least one of the following commitments: temporary, interim, and occasional. Temporary volunteers might volunteer for a few hours or days for a short period of time. Interim volunteers are a bit more like long-term volunteers in that they typically devote a specified period of time where they volunteer at regular intervals for a specific project or goal. Finally, occasional volunteers typically volunteer for short durations at regular intervals. For example, perhaps someone volunteers every December to answer phones to collect donations for the Maryland State Police and Special Olympics-sponsored polar bear plunge that's coming up. Another way to elicit volunteers is called micro-volunteering. This involves posting a call for help on a specific project. Multiple volunteers might submit their work, and then your organization chooses the best work to use. There's likely no continuous relationship with the volunteers, but you get the project you need completed, and the volunteers have a chance to build their resume and practice their skills. Once you've decided what kind of time commitment you need for your volunteers, you must consider the following critical issues in volunteer management. First, consider how will you recruit these volunteers. Consider what motivates different types of people and create roles that are helpful to you, but still fulfill these motivators and rewards. There are essentially two types of motivators and rewards, and these are intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic rewards typically focus on the internal reasons for why a person volunteers. Perhaps they enjoy accomplishing something, or like a mental or physical challenge. Perhaps the volunteer is looking to learn something new or develop his or her skills. Maybe the volunteer simply has spare time and would like to spend it helping out people in his or her community. For example, when I was a student at Towson University, I was the president of a student organization on campus. My major was also in international studies, and I enjoyed learning about other cultures. I knew I wanted to do something where I could make a difference, but also learn something. So I worked with a nonprofit organization, SERVE, to set up a day where our student group went to their warehouse facilities to perform quality checks on and package handmade crafts that would then be sold by the organization on the artisan's behalf. At the same time, we enjoyed the intrinsic reward of learning more about microloans, fair trade, and the culture and stories of the artisans from around the world. On the other hand, extrinsic motivators and rewards refer to the perks that people get by volunteering, such as professional development, the networking opportunities, recognition such as thank you letters, awards, public recognition, and more. We also earned some extrinsic rewards as part of volunteering for SERVE. After our student group had finished working in the warehouse for about 5 to 6 hours, we earned a discount in the store where we could buy some of the crafts like those we had just helped package. This still helps the organization and the artisans because we were purchasing the fair trade goods, but we also had earned the benefit of a discount. In the past, SERVE has also run bios of its volunteers on social media, or they'll publish articles about them in their catalogs. These are all examples of those extrinsic motivators and rewards. So once you recognize the motivators and rewards your volunteer opportunities have to offer, how will you recruit your volunteers? There are many ways, such as those listed on this slide. The most important tip I can offer is to consider your audience. Are you looking for young teens? Maybe you should advertise on social media like Instagram, or give a presentation at the local high school, library, or other community group. Are you looking for young professionals? Social media is another great option, but maybe consider Facebook over Instagram, as millennials are typically still using the platform while younger teens are less engaged on Facebook. Maybe you're looking for middle-aged people or older. Consider advertising your volunteer opportunities in a church, synagogue, or mosque pamphlet, on a senior center bulletin board, or in neighborhood newsletters. Once the word is out about your volunteer opportunities, you should have a formal application for volunteers unless you're using strictly word of mouth or friends and family or clients for recruiting. One of your employees should be charged with maintaining the application system, and do not ignore volunteer applicants. Touch base with them or risk losing them. Even if they're not what you're currently looking for, or you're not even currently looking, better to acknowledge them and build some rapport in case you find you do need them in the future. This volunteer relations management requires a database. It's good to include the volunteer's name, job, focus, skills, how you met them, or if they're a stealth applicant. Stealth applicant is actually a word I'm borrowing from enrollment management in higher education. We consider stealth applicants to be students who have never interacted with the university, but still submit an application. Once you have your volunteer applicants, you might do an interview process, perhaps a background check, but once you've chosen your volunteers, you must have a volunteer handbook. The handbook will help you set expectations. It should outline how performance will be evaluated, the nature of the time commitment, safety protocols, and your policies on confidentiality and appropriate conduct. The last two are particularly important if your volunteers will be working with kids or vulnerable populations. Finally, include how performance is measured and if formal performance evaluations will be utilized. Include the schedule for evaluations. Now that you understand the basics and critical issues of volunteer management, consider the challenges you might face. These could include recruiting diverse volunteers, completing performance evaluations, and also terminations. One of the challenging challenges facing volunteer managers currently is keeping up with the changing demographics of the United States and recruiting diverse populations of volunteers. The Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act of 2009 was designed to tackle this problem. The act aimed to increase participation in volunteer service from diverse groups, specifically youth, minority groups, and older populations. While UGA and UNC Wilmington professors Rebecca Nesbitt and Jeffrey Bredney found the act would likely make little difference in the number of Americans volunteering, they did believe there was room for growth in volunteerism due to a naturally changing demographics in the U.S. They also found that there were some necessary actions nonprofits needed to take in order to face the challenge of recruiting these growing populations. The Hispanic, African American, and older populations are expected to continue growing. According to the professors, minority populations do not volunteer either because they don't know about opportunities or they weren't invited to do so. In order to combat this issue, nonprofits should market opportunities through ethnic or cultural media. According to one report, advertising a need for Hispanic volunteers on Spanish-speaking television stations led to a 60% increase in traffic on the organization's website. Language is another obvious communication barrier to these communities. Organizations should consider hiring bilingual staff and creating accommodations for volunteers when no one can speak their language. Once communication has been established, nonprofits must demonstrate their organization's cultural relevance for minority groups and match volunteer activities with what truly motivates these groups. Relevance can be established by hiring employees who identify with minority groups. Additionally, relationships could be built with the members of these communities to see what types of volunteer activities truly inspire or motivate these groups. For example, older populations might want to volunteer in positions where they can mentor younger populations or offer their expertise learned through a career of work. Creating avenues for access to these populations will allow the nonprofit to expand its volunteer pool and reach a more diverse group of people. Another challenge that novice volunteer managers may not consider is the dreaded performance evaluation. Performance evaluations, however, do not have to be dreaded. They can be positive and helpful experiences, but they must be done well. First, a performance evaluation must be in congruence with the duties the volunteer is tasked to complete. You must avoid bringing up how an employee does not contribute to an office potluck if that's not an official duty. Furthermore, the clearer the expectations, goals, and objectives you include in your handbook, any onboarding training or orientations, the better informed your employee or your volunteer will be, and the more likely he or she will be to perform to your standards. Now, let's say that your volunteer is not performing to standard. I'm just going to go back really quickly. So let's say that your employee is not performing to standard. You may have several options to consider. If a volunteer does not know or comprehend the policies or expectations, have a meeting to go over these and give the volunteer an opportunity to ask questions. You could also give the volunteer a new position or task. The volunteer might need a refresher on training, or he or she could simply be volunteering too much for too long and the person's burnt out. I'm sure we've all experienced that at some point. Suggest the volunteer take a break. If you have exhausted these options or these options are not feasible, consider referring volunteers to other agencies more appropriate to the volunteer's needs, or allowing long-term volunteers the dignity to resign. If none of these options are working out, you may come to a point where you must terminate the volunteer or else risk hurting your organization, its employees, its clients, its reputation, or its mission. Termination processes should be outlined in your handbook to ensure consistency and avoid the appearance of ill will towards your volunteers. These will not be easy conversations, but they are necessary. So where do we kind of go from here? What are 2 lessons to kind of take away from this training? First, we must recognize that volunteers are donated human capital and should be extremely highly valued. These are people who care about your mission and want to donate their time to helping you achieve it. It's 100% worth it to spend the time and money into developing a plan to work with them. Second, you need a management plan in order to ensure the experience for the volunteer is positive and you're getting the results you're looking for. That management plan should include a designated volunteer manager, well-designed recruitment strategies, buy-in from your professional staff, a formal application process, database management, onboarding including a handbook and training, and purposeful recognition of volunteers. If you follow these steps, your volunteer program can absolutely take your organization far in reaching its goals. So I appreciate everyone logging in today, and I'll be sending out a handout with some of this information as well as some extra resources, and of course my contact information as well, just in case any of you have any questions. So thanks again for coming tonight, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you.